Chapter 2, The God Hypothesis. The religion of one age is the literary entertainment of the next. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser. A misogynist, a homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filical, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent, bully. Those of us schooled from infancy in his ways can become desensitized to their honor. A knave blessed with the perspective of innocence has a clearer perception. Winston Churchill's son, Rodonald, somehow contrived to remain ignorant of scripture until Evelyn Waugh and a brother officer, in a vain attempt to keep Churchill quiet when they were posted together during the war, bet him he couldn't read the entire Bible in a fortnight. Unhappily, it has not had the result we hoped. He has never read any of it before and is hideously cited. Keep reading quotations aloud. I say, I bet you didn't know this came in the Bible. Or merely slapping his side and chortling, God isn't God a shit. Thomas Jefferson, better read, was of a similar opinion, describing the God of Moses as a being of terrific character, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust. It is unfair to attack such an easy target. The God hypothesis should not stand or fall with its most unlovely instantiation, Yahweh, nor his insipidly opposite Christian face. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild. To be fair, this milk-soap persona owes more to his Victorian followers than to Jesus himself. Could anything be more mawkishly non-seating than Mrs. C.F. Alexander's Christian children all must be mild, obedient, good as he? I'm not attacking the particular qualities of Yahweh or Jesus or Allah or any other specific god such as Baal, Zeus or Wotan. Instead, I shall define the God hypothesis more defensively. There exists a supernatural intelligence who deliberately designed and created the universe and everything in it, including us. This book will advocate an alternative view. Any creative intelligence of sufficient complexity to design anything comes into existence only as the end product of an extended process of gradual evolution. Creative intelligences being evolved necessarily arrive late in the universe and therefore cannot be responsible for designing it. God, in the sense defined, is a delusion, and as later chapters will show, a pernicious delusion. Not surprisingly, since it is founded on local traditions of private revelation rather than evidence, the God hypothesis come in many versions. Historians of religion recognize a progression from primitive tribal animism through polytheism such as those of the Greeks, Romans, and Norsemen, to monotheisms such as Judaism and its derivatives, Christianity and Islam. Polytheism. It is not clear why the change from polytheism to monotheism should be assumed to be a self-evidently progressive improvement, but it is widely as an assumption that provoked Ibn Warraq, author of Why I Am Not a Muslim, wittily to conjecture that monotheism is in its turn doomed to subtract one more god and became atheist. The Catholic Encyclopedia dismisses polytheism and atheism in the same insouciant breath. Formal domestic atheism is self-refuting and has never de facto won the reasoned assent of any considerable number of men, nor can polytheism. However easily it may take hold of the popular imagination, ever satisfy the mind of a philosopher. Monotheistic Chauvinism was until recently written into the clarity law of both England and Scotland, discriminating against polytheistic religions and granting tax-exempt status while allowing an easy ride to charities whose object was to promote monotheistic religions, sparing them the rigorous waiting quiet properly required of secular charities. It was my ambition to persuade a member of Britain's respected Hindu community to come forward and bring a civil action to test this snobbing discrimination against polytheism. Far better, of course, would be abandoned the promotion of religion altogether as grounds for charitable status. The benefit of this to society would be great, especially in the United States, where the sums of tax-free monkey sucked in by churches. The polishing the heels of already well-heeled televangelists reach levels that could fairly be described as obscene. The aptly named Oral Roberts once told his television audience that God would kill him unless they gave him $8 million. Almost unbelievably, it worked. Tax-free, Roberts himself is still going strong, as is Oral Roberts' University of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Its buildings, valued at $250 million, were directly commissioned by God himself in these words: "Raise up your students to hear my voice, to go where my light is dim, where my voice is heard small, and my healing power is not known, even to the uttermost bounds of the earth. Their work will exceed yours, and in this I am well pleased." On reflection, my imagined Hindu litigator would have been as likely to play the "if you can't beat them, join them" card. His polytheism isn't really polytheism, but monotheism in disguise. There is only one God, Lord Brahma, the creator, Lord Vishnu, the preserver, Lord Shiva, the destroyer, the goddess Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Parvati, wives of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, Lord Ganesh, the elephant god, and hundreds of others. All are just different manifestation or incarnations of the one God. Christians should warm to such sophistry. Rivers of medieval ink, not to mention blood, have been squandered over the mystery of the Trinity, and in surpassing deviations such as the Arian heresy, Arius of Alexandria in the 4th century AD denied that Jesus was consubstantial, example of the same substance or essence with God. What on earth could that possibly mean? You are probably asking, substance. What substance? What exactly do you mean by essence? Very little seems the only reasonable reply. Yet the controversy split Christendom down the middle of a century, and the Emperor Constantine ordered that all copies of Arius' book should be burned, splitting Christendom by splitting hairs. Such has never been the way of theology. Do we have one God in 3 parts, or 3 gods in one? The Catholic Encyclopedia clears up the matter for us. In a masterpiece of theological close reasoning, in the unity of Godhead, there are 3 persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These 3 persons should truly distinct one from another. Thus, in the words of the Athanasians Creed, the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. And yet, there are not 3 gods, but one God. As if that was not clear enough, the encyclopedia quotes the 3rd century theologian St. Gregory, the Michael worker. There is therefore nothing created, nothing subjected to another in the Trinity, nor is there anything that has been added as though it once had not existed but had entered afterwards. Therefore, the Father has never been without the Son, nor the Son without the Spirit, and this same Trinity is immutable and unalterable forever. Whatever miracles may have earned St. Gregory his nickname, they were not miracles of honest lucidity. His words convey the characteristically obscurantist flavor of theology, which, unlike science or most other branches of human scholarship, has not moved on in 18th centuries. Thomas Jefferson, as so often, got it right when he said, ridicule is the only weapon which can be used against unintelligible propositions. Ideas must be distinct before reason can act upon them, and no man ever had distinct idea of the Trinity. It is the mere abracadabra of the mountebanks calling themselves the priest of Jesus. The other thing I cannot help remarking upon is the overweening confidence with which the religious assert minute details for which they neither have nor could have any evidence. Perhaps it is the very fact that there is no evidence to support theological opinions either way that fosters the characteristics draconian holistically towards those of slightly different opinion, especially as it happens. In this very field of Trinitarianism, Jefferson helped ridicule on the doctrine that, as he put in, there are 3 gods in his critique of Calvinism, but it is especially the Roman Catholic branch of Christianity that pushes its recurrent flirtation with polytheism towards runaway inflation. The Trinity is, or are, joined by Mary, Queen of Heaven, a goddess in all but name, who surely runs God himself a close second as a target of prayers. The pantheon is further swallowed by an army of saints whose intercessory power makes them, if not demigods, well worth approaching on their own specialist subject. The Catholic Community Forum helpfully lists 5120 saints, together with their areas of expertise, which include abdominal pains, abuse victims, anorexia, arms dealers, blacksmiths, broken bones, bomb techniques, and bowel disorders, to venture no further than the beast. And we must not forget the four choirs of Anglic hosts, eras in 9 orders: seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues, power, principalities, archangels, heads of all hosts, and just plain old angels, including our closest friends, the ever watchful guardian angels. What impresses me about Catholic mythology is partly its tasteless kitsch, but mostly the airy nonchalance with which these people makes up the details as they go along. It is just shamelessly invented. Pope John Paul II created more saints than all his predecessors of the past several centuries put together, and he had a special affinity with the Virgin Mary. His polytheistic hankerings were dramatically demonstrated in 1981 when he suffered an assassination attempt in Rome and attributed his survival to intervention by Our Lady of Fatima. A maternal hand guided the bullet. One cannot help wondering why she didn't guide it to miss him altogether. Others might think the team of surgeons who operated on him for 6 hours deserved at least a share of the credit, but perhaps their hands too were maternally guided. The relevant point is that it was not just Our Lady who, in the Pope's opinion, guided the bullet, but specifically Our Lady of Fatima. Presumably Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Medjugorje, Our Lady of Akita, Our Lady of G-Town, Our Lady of Garabandal, and Our Lady of Knock were busy on other errands at the time. How did the Greeks, the Romans, and the Vikings cope with such polytheological conundrums? Was Venus just another name for Aphrodite, or were they two distinct goddesses of love? Was Thor with his hammer a manifestation of Wotan, or a separate god? Who cares? Life is too short to bother with the distinction between one figment of the imagination and many. Having gestures towards polytheism to cover myself against a charge of neglect, I shall say no more about it. For brevity, I shall refer to all deities, whether poly or monotheistic, as simply God. I am also conscious that the Abrahamic God is, to put it mildly, aggressively made, and this too I shall accept as a convention in my use of pronouns. More sophisticated theologians proclaim the sexlessness of God, while some feminist theologians seek to redress historic injustices by designating her female. But what, after all, what is the difference between a non-existent female and a non-existent male? I suppose that in the dizzily unreal intersection of theology and feminism, existence might indeed be a less salient attribute than gender. I am aware that critiques of religion can be attacked for failing to credit the fertile diversity of traditions and worldviews that have been called religious. Anthropologically informed works from Sir James Fraser's Golden Bough to Pascal Boyer's Religion Explained or Scott Atran's in God We Trust fascinatingly documented the bizarre phenomenology of superstition and ritual. Read such books and marvel at the richness of human gullibility. But that is not the way of this book. I decree supernaturalism in all its forms, and the most effective way to proceed will be to concentrate on the form most likely to be familiar to my readers, the form that impinges most threateningly on all our societies. Most of my readers will have been reared in one or another of today's 3 great monotheistic religions, 4 if you count Mormonism, all of which trace themselves back to the mythological patriarch Abraham. And it will be convenient to keep this family of tradition in mind throughout the rest of the book. This is as good a moment as any to forestall an inevitable retort to the book, one that would otherwise, as sure as night follows day, turn up in a review. The God that Dawkins doesn't believe in is a God that I don't believe in either. I don't believe in an old man in the sky with a long white beard. That old man is an irrelevant distraction, and his beard is as tedious as it is long. Indeed, the distraction is worse than irrelevant. It is very silliness is calculated to distract attention from the fact that what the speaker really believes is not a whole lot less silly. I know you do not believe in an old bearded man sitting on a cloud, so let's not waste any more time on that. I'm not attacking any particular version of gods or God. I am attacking God, all gods, anything and everything supernatural, wherever and whenever they have been or will be invented. Monotheism. The great unmentionable evil at the center of our culture is monotheism. From a barbaric Bronze Age text known as the Old Testament, three anti-human religions have evolved: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There are sky god religions. They are literally patriarchal. God is the omnipotent father. Hence, the loathing of women for 2000 years in those centuries of afflicted by the sky god and his earthy male delegates. Gore Vidal. The oldest of the three Abrahamic religions and the clear ancestor of all of the other two is Judaism. Originally a tribal cult of a single, fiercely unpleasant god, morbidly obsessed with sexual restrictions, with the smell of charred flesh, with his own superiority over rival gods, and with the exclusiveness of his chosen desert tribe. During the Roman occupation of Palestine, Christianity was founded by Paul of Tarsus as a less ruthlessly monotheistic sect of Judaism, a less exclusive one, which looked outward from the Jews to the rest of the world. Several centuries later, Muhammad and his followers reverted to the uncompromising monotheism of the Jewish original, but not its exclusiveness, and founded Islam upon a new holy book, the Quran, adding a power of ideology of military conquest to spread the faith. Christianity too was spread by the sword, wielded first by Roman hands after the Emperor Constantine raised it from eccentric cult to official religion, then by the Crusaders, and later by the conquistadors and other European invaders and colonists with missionary accomplishments. For most of many purposes, all three Abrahamic religions can be treated as indistinguishable, unless otherwise stated. I shall have Christianity most in mind, but only because it is the vision with which I happened to be most familiar. For my purposes, the differences matter less than the similarities, and I shall not be concerned at all with the other religions such as Buddhism or Confucianism. Indeed, there is something to be said for treating these not as religions at all, but as ethical systems or philosophies of life. The simple definition of the God hypothesis with which I began has to be substantially fleshed out if it is to accommodate the Abrahamic God. He not only created the universe, he is a personal God dwelling within, or perhaps outside it, whatever that might mean, processing the unpleasantly human qualities to which I have alluded. Personal qualities, whether pleasant or unpleasant, form no part of the deist God of Voltaire and Thomas Paine. Compared with Old Testament's psychotic delinquent, the deist God of the 18th century Enlightenment is an altogether grander being, worthy of his cosmic creation, loftily unconcerned with human affairs, sublimely aloof from our private thoughts and hopes, caring nothing for our messy sins or mumbled contritions. The deist God is a physical to end all physics, and the alpha and the omega of the mathematicians, the apotheosis of designers, a hyper-engineer who set up the laws and constant of the universe, fine-tuned them with exquisite precision, and for knowledge detonated what we would now call the hot Big Bang, retired and was never heard from again. In times of stronger faith, deists have been revealed as indistinguishable from atheists. Susan Jacoby in Freethinkers, A History of American Secularism, lists a choice selection of the epithets hurled at the poor Tom Paine: Judas, reptile, hog, mad dog, sauce, loss, archbeast, brute, liar, and of course, infidel. Paine died abandoned, with the honorable exception of Jefferson, by political former friends embarrassed by his anti-Christian views. Nowadays, the ground has shifted so far that deists are more likely to be contrasted with atheists and lumped with theists. They do, after all, believe in a supreme intelligence who created the universe. Secularism, the founding father and the religion of America. It is conventional to assume that the founding father of American Republic were deists. No doubt, many of them were, although it has been argued that the greatest of them might have been atheists. Certainly, their writings on religion in their own time leave me in no doubt that most of them would have been atheists in ours. But whatever their individual religious views in their own time, the one thing they collectively were is secularists. And this is the topic of which I turn in this section, beginning with a perhaps surprising quotation from Senator Barry Goldwater in 1981, clearly showing how staunchly that presidential candidate and hero of American conservatism upheld the secular tradition of Republic's foundation. There is no position on which people are so immovable as their religious beliefs. There is no more powerful ally one can claim in the debate than Jesus Christ or God or Allah or whatever one calls this supreme being. But like any powerful weapon, the use of God's name on one's behalf should be used sparingly. The religious factions that are growing throughout our land are not using their religious clout with wisdom. They are trying to force government leaders into following their positions 100%. If you disagree with these religious groups on a particular moral issue, they complain, they threaten you with a loss of money or votes or both. I am frankly sick and tired of the political preacher across this country telling me as a citizen that if I want to be a moral person, I must believe in A, B, C, and D. Just who do they think they are? And from where do they presume to claim the right to dictate their moral beliefs to me? And I am even more angry as a legislator who must endure the threats of every religious group who thinks it has some God-granted right to control me, to control my vote on every roll call in the Senate. I am warning them today. I will fight them every step of the way if they try to dictate their moral convictions to all Americans in the name of conservatism. The religious views of the founding fathers are of great interest to propagandists of today's American right, anxious to push their vision of history. Contrary to the view, the fact that the United States was not founded as a Christian nation was early stated in the terms of treaty with Tripoli, drafted in 1796 under George Washington and signed by John Adams in 1797. As the government of United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mahometan nation. It is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two centuries. The opening words of this quotation would cause uproar in today's Washington ascendancy. Yet E.D. Buckner has convincingly demonstrated that they caused no dissent at the time among either politician or public. The paradox has often been noted that the United States, founded in secularism, is now the most religious country in Christendom, while England, with an established church healed by its constitutional monarch, is among the least. I am continually asked why this is, and I do not know. I suppose it is possible that England has veered of religion after an appalling history of interfaith violence, with Protestants and Catholics alternately gaining the upper hand and systematically murdering the other lot. Another suggestion stems from the observation that America is a nation of immigrants. A colleague points out to me that immigrants uprooted from the stability and comfort of an extended family in Europe could well have embraced a church as a kind of keen substitute of alien soil. It is an interesting idea, worth researching further. There is no doubt that many Americans see their own local church as an important unit of identity, which does indeed have some of the attributes of an extended family. Yet another hypothesis is that the religiosity of America stems paradoxically from the secularism of its constitution. Precisely because America is legally secular, religion has become free enterprise. Rival churches compete for congregations, not least for the fat tithes that they bring, and the competition is waged with all the aggressive hard-shell techniques of marketplace. What works for soap flakes works for God, and the result is something approaching religious mania among today's less educated class. In England, by contrast, religion under the aegis of the established church has become little more than a pleasant social pastime, scarcely recognizable as religious at all. This English tradition is nicely expressed by Giles Fraser, an Anglican vicar who doubles as a philosophy tutor at Oxford, writing in The Guardian. Fraser's article is subtitled "The Establishment of Church of England Took God Out of Religion, but There Are Risks in a More Vigorous Approach to Faith." He writes, "There was a time when the country vicar was a staple of the English dramatis persona, the tea-drinking, gentle eccentric with his polished shoes and kindly manners, represented a type of religion that didn't make non-religious people uncomfortable. He wouldn't break into an existential sweat or press you against a wall to ask if you were saved, still less launch crusades from the pulpit or plant roadside bombs in the name of some higher power." Fraser goes on to say that the nice country vicar in effect inoculated vast swaths of the English against Christianity. He ends his article by laminating a more recent trend in the Church of England to take religion seriously again, and his last sentence is a warning. The worry is that we may release the gene of English religious fanaticism from the establishment box in which it has been dormant for centuries. The gene of religious fantasm is rampant in present-day America, and the founding fathers would have been horrified. Whether or not it is right to embrace the paradox and blame the secular constitution that they devised, the founders most certainly were secularists who believe in keeping religion out of politics, and that is enough to place them firmly on the side of those who object, for example, to ostentatious displays of the 10 Commandments in government-owned public places. But it is tantalizing to speculate that the least some of the founders might have gone beyond deism. Might they have been agnostics or even out-and-out atheists? The following statement of Jefferson is indistinguishable from what we would now call agnosticism. To talk of immaterial existence is to talk of nothings. To say that the human soul, angels, God are immaterial. To talk of immaterial existence is talk of nothing. To say that the human soul, angels, gods are immaterial is to say that they are nothing, or that there is no God, no angels, no soul. I cannot reason otherwise. Without plunging into the fathomless abyss of dreams and phantasms, I am satisfied and sufficiently occupied with the things which are without tormenting or troubling myself about those which may indeed be, but of which I have no evidence. Christopher Hitchens, in his biography, Thomas Jefferson, author of America, thinks it is likely that Jefferson was an atheist even in his own time when it was much harder. As to whether he was an atheist, we must reserve judgment if only because of the prudence he was compelled to absorb during his political life, but as he had written to his nephew, Peter Carr, as early as 1786, one must not be frightened from this inquiry by any fear of its consequences. If it ends in a belief that there is no God, you will find incitements to virtue in the comfort and pleasantness you feel in this exercise, and the love of others which it will procure you. I find the following advice of Jefferson, again in his letter to Peter Carr, moving: "Shake off all the fears of servile prejudice, under which weak minds are servilely crouched. Fix reason firmly in her seat, and call on her tribunal for every fact, every opinion. Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of the blindfolded fear." Remarks of Jefferson's, such as "Christianity is the most perverted system that ever shone on man," are compatible with deism, but also with atheism. So is James Madison's robust anti-clericalism. During almost 15th century has the legal establishment of Christianity been on trial? What has been in fruits? More or less, in all places, pride and indolence in clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution. The same could be said of Benjamin Franklin. Lighthouses are more useful than churches. John Adams seems to have been a deist of a strongly anti-clerical stripe, and he delivered himself of some splendid tirades against Christianity in particular. As I understand the Christian religion, it was and is a revelation. But how has it happened that millions of fable, tales, legends have been blended with both Jewish and Christian revelation that have made them the most bloody religion that ever existed? And in another letter, this time to Jefferson, I almost shudder at the thought of alluding to the most fatal example of the abuses of grief which the history of mankind has preserved. The cross, consider what calamities that engine of grief has produced. Whether Jefferson and his colleague were theists, deists, agnostics, or atheists, they were also passionate secularists who believed that the religious opinions of a president or lack of them were entirely his own business. All the founding fathers, whatever their private religious beliefs would have been, aghast to read the journalist Robert Sherman's report of George Bush Sr.'s answer when Sherman asked him whether he recognized the equal citizenship or patriotism of Americans who were atheists. No, I don't know that atheists should be considered as citizens, nor should they be considered patriots. This is one nation under God. Assuming Sherman's account to be accurate, unfortunately he didn't use a tape recorder and no other people ran the story at the time. Try the experiment of replacing atheists with Jews or Muslims or blacks. That gives the measure of the prejudice and discrimination that American atheists have to endure today. Natile Angier's Confessions of a Lonely Atheist is a sad and moving description in the New York Times of her feelings of isolation as an atheist in today's America. But the isolation of American atheists is an illusion, assiduously cultivated by prejudice. Atheists in America are more numerous than most people realize. As I said in the preface, American atheists far outnumber religious Jews. Yet the Jewish lobby is notoriously one of the most formidably influential in Washington. What might American atheists achieve if they organize themselves properly? David Mills, in his admirable book Atheist Universe, tells a story which you would dismiss as an unrealistic caricature of police bigotry if it were fiction. A Christian faith healer ran a miracle crusade which came to Mills' hometown once a year. Among other things, one faith healer encouraged diabetic to throw away their insulin and cancer patient to give up their chemotherapy and pray for a miracle instead. Reasonably enough, Mills decided to organize a peaceful demonstration to warn people, but he made the mistake of going to the police to tell them of his intention and ask for police protection against possible attacks from supporters of the faith healer. The first police officer to whom he spoke asked, "Is you gonna protest for him or against him?" Meaning, for or against the faith healer. When Mills replied against him, the policeman said that he himself planned to attend the rally and intended to spit personally in Mills' face as he marched past Mills' demonstration. Mills decided to try his luck with a second police officer. This one said that if any of the faith healer supporters violently confronted Mills, the officer would arrest Mills because he was trying to interfere with God's work. Mills went home and tried telephoning the police station in the hope of finding more sympathy at a senior level. He was finally connected to a sergeant who said, "To hell with you, buddy. No policeman wants to protect you. No policeman wants to protect a god-damned atheist. I hope somebody bloodies you up good." Apparently, adverbs were in short supply in this police station, along with the milk of human kindness and a sense of duty. Mills relates that he spoke to about 7 or 8 policemen that day. None of them was helpful and most of them directly threatened Mills with violence. Anecdotes of such prejudice against atheists abound, but Margarine Downey, founder of the Anti-Discrimination Support Network ADSN, maintains systematic record of such cases through the Free Thought Society of Greater Philadelphia. Her debates of incidents categorized under community, schools, workplace, media, family, and government includes example of harassment, loss of jobs, shunning by family, and even murder. Downey's documented evidence of the hatred and misunderstanding of atheists makes it easy to believe that it is indeed virtually impossible for an honest atheist to win a public election in America. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 members of Senate. Assuming that the majority of these 535 individuals are an educated sample of the population, it is statically all but inevitable that a substantial number of them must be atheists. They must have lied or concealed their true feelings in order to get elected. Who can blame them, given the electorate they had to convince. It is universally accepted that an admission of atheism would be instant political suicide for any presidential candidate. These facts about today's political climate in the United States and what they simply would have horrified Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Adams, and all their friends, whether they were atheists, agnostics, deists, or Christians. They would have recoiled in horror film. The theocrats of early 21st century Washington, they would have been drawn instead to the secularist founding father of post-colonial India, especially the religious Gandhi. I am a Hindu, I am Muslim, I am a Jewish, I am a Jew, I am a Christian, I am a Buddhist, and the atheist Nehru. They would have been drawn instead to the secularist founding fathers of post-colonial India, especially the religious Gandhi and atheist Nehru. The spectacle of what is called religion, or at any rate organized religion, in India and elsewhere has filled me with horror, and I have frequently condemned it and wished to make a clean sweep of it. Almost always it seemed to stand for blind belief and reaction, dogma and bigotry, superstitions, exploitation, and the preservation of vested interests. Nehru's definition of a secular India, of Gandhi's dream, would that it had been realized instead of partitioning of their country amid an interfaith bloodbath. Gandhi's dream might almost have been ghosted by Jefferson himself. We talk about a secular India. Some people think that it means something opposed to religion. That obviously is not correct. What it means is that it is a state which honors all faiths equally, and gives them equal opportunities. India has a long history of religious tolerance. In a country like India, which has many faiths and religions, no real nationalism can be built up except on the basis of secularity. The deist God, often isolated with the founding fathers, is certainly an improvement over the monster of the Bible. Unfortunately, it is scarcely more likely that he exists, or ever did. In any of its forms, the God hypothesis is unnecessary. The God hypothesis is also very close to being ruled out by the laws of probability. I shall come to that in chapter 4 after dealing with alleged proof of existence of God in chapter 3. Meanwhile, I turn to agnosticism, the erroneous notion that the existence or non-existence of God is an untouchable question, forever beyond the reach of science. The poverty of Gnosticism, the robust, muscular Christian haranguing us from the pulpit of my old school chapel admitted a sneaking regard for atheists. They at least had the courage of their misguided conviction. What these preachers couldn't understand was agnostics. Namby-pamby, mushy-pap, weak tea, widdy, pallid fins, sitters. He was partly right, but for wholly the wrong reason. In the same vein, according to a Quentin de la Baudiere, the Catholic historian Hugh Roche Williamson respected the committed religious believer and also the committed atheist. He reserved his contempt for the wishy-washy, boneless mediocrities who flapped around in the middle. There is nothing wrong with being agnostic in cases where we lack evidence one way or the other. It is reasonable position. Carl Sagan was proud to be agnostic when asked whether there was a life elsewhere in the universe. When he refused to commit himself, his interlocutor praised him for a gut feeling, and he immortally replied, "But I try not to think with my gut. Really? It's okay to reserve judgment until the evidence is in." The question of extraterrestrial life is open. Good arguments can be mounted both ways, and we lack the evidence to do more than shade the probabilities one way or the other. Agnosticism, of a kind, is an appropriate stance on many scientific questions, such as what caused the end Permian extinction, the great mass extinction in fossil history. It could have been a meteorite strike like the one that, with greater likelihood on present evidence, caused the later extinction of the dinosaurs. But it could have been any of various other possible causes, or a combination. Agnosticism about the causes of both these mass extinctions is reasonable. How about question of God? Should we be agnostic about him too? Many have said definitely yes. often with an air of conviction that verges on protesting too much at the right. I'll begin by distinguishing two kinds of agnosticism. TAP, or temporary agnosticism in practice, is a legitimate fence sitting where there really is a definite answer, one way or the other. But we so far lack the evidence to reach it and don't understand the evidence or haven't time to read the evidence, etc. TAP, temporary agnosticism in practice, would be a reasonable stance towards the Permian extinction. There is a truth out there and one day we hope to know it, though for the moment we don't. But there is also a deeply inescapable kind of fence sitting which I shall call PAP, permanent agnosticism in principle. The fact that acronym spells a word used by that school preacher in almost accidental. The PAP style of agnosticism is appropriate for questions that never be answered, no matter how much evidence we gather. But the very idea of evidence is not applicable. The question exists on a different plane or in a different dimension, beyond the zones where evidence can reach. An example might be that philosophical chestnut, the question whether you see red as I do, maybe your red is my green, or something completely different from any color that I can imagine. Philosophers cite this question as one that never be answered, no matter what new evidence might one day become available. And some scientists and other intellectuals are convinced, too eagerly in my view, that the question of God's existence belongs in the forever inaccessible TAP category. From this, as we shall see, they often make the illogical deduction that the hypothesis of God's existence and the hypothesis of his non-existence have exactly equal probability of being right. The view that I shall defend is very important, very different. Agnosticism about the existence of God belongs firmly in the temporary or TAP category. Either he exists or he doesn't. It is a scientific question. One day we may know the answer, and meanwhile we can say something pretty strong about the probability. In the history of ideas, there are examples of questions being answered that had earlier been judged forever out of science's reach. In 1835, we celebrated French philosopher Auguste Comte wrote of the stars, "We shall never able to study by any method their chemical composition or their mineralogical structure." Yet, even before Comte set down these words, Fraunhofer and began using his spectroscope to analyze the chemical composition of the sun. Now spectroskeptics daily confound Comte's agnosticism with their long-distance analysis of the precise chemical composition of even distant stars. Whatever the exact status of Comte's astronomical agnosticism, this cautionary tale suggests, at the very least, that we should hesitate before proclaiming the eternal verity of agnosticism too loudly. Nevertheless, when it comes to God, a great many philosophers and scientists are glad to do so, beginning with the inventor of the world itself, T.H. Huxley. Huxley explained his coining while rising to a personal attack that it had provoked the principal of King's College, London. The Reverend Dr. Weiss had poured scorn on Huxley's cowardly agnosticism. He may prefer to call himself an agnostic, but his real name is an older one. He is an infidel, that is to say, an unbeliever. The word infidel perhaps carries an unpleasant significance. Perhaps it is right that it ought to be an unpleasant thing for a man to have to say plainly that he does not believe in Jesus Christ. Huxley was not the man to let that sort of provocation pass him by, and his reply in 1889 was a robustly scathing, as we should expect, although never departing from scrupulous good manners. Eventually, having dealt Dr. Weiss his just comeuppance and buried the remains, Huxley returned to the word agnostic and explained how first came by it. Others, he noted, we're quite sure they had attained a certain gnosis, had more or less successfully solved the problem of existence, while I was quite sure I had not, and had a pretty strong conviction that the problem was insoluble. And with Hume and Kant on my side, I could not think myself presumptuous in holding fast by that opinion. So I took thought and invented by what I convinced to be the appropriate title of agnostic. Later in his speech, Huxley went went on to explain that agnostics have no creed and not even a negative one. Agnosticism, in fact, is not a creed but a method, the essence of which lies in the rigorous application of a single principle. Positively, the principle may be expressed in matters of the intellect. Follow your reason as far as it will take you, without regard to any other consideration. And negatively, in matter of the intellect, do not pretend that conclusions are certain, which are not demonstrated or demonstrable, that I take to be the agnostic faith, which if a man keep whole and unpeeled, shall be not ashamed to look the universe in the face, whatever the future may have in the store for him. To a scientist, these are noble words, and one doesn't criticize T.H. Huxley lightly, but Huxley, in his concentration upon the absolute impossibility for proving or disproving God, seems to have been ignoring the shading of probability. The fact that we can neither prove or disprove the existence of something does not put existence and non-existence on an even footing. I do not think Huxley would disagree. I suspect that when he appeared to do so, he was bending over backwards to concede a point in the interest of securing another one. We have all done this at one time or another. Contrary to Huxley, I shall suggest that the existence of God is a scientific hypothesis like any other. Even if hard to test in practice, it belongs to the same tap or temporary agnosticism box as the controversies over the Permian and Cretaceous extinctions. God's existence or non-existence is a scientific fact about the universe, discoverable in principle if not in practice. If he existed and chose to reveal it, God himself would clinch the argument noisily and unequivocally in his favor. And even if God's existence is never proved or disproved with certainty, one way or the other, available evidence and reasoning may yield an estimate of probability far from 50%. Let's then take the idea of spectrum of probabilities seriously. Let's place human judgment about the existence of God along it. Between two extremes of opposite certainty, the spectrum is continuous, but it can be represented by the following 7 milestones along the way. First, strong theist, 100% probability of God. In the word of C.G. Jung, I do not believe I know. I do not believe I know. Second, very high probability but sort of 100%, de facto theist. I cannot know for certain, but I strongly believe in God and I live my life on the assumption that He is there. Third, higher than 50% but not very high. Technically agnostic but leaning towards theism. I am very uncertain but I am inclined to believe in God. Fourth, exactly 50%, completely impartial agnostic. God's existence and non-existence are exactly equiprobable. Fifth, lower than 50% but not very low, technically agnostic but leaning towards atheism. I don't know whether God exists, but I'm inclined to be skeptical. Sixth, very low probability but short of zero, de facto atheist. I cannot know for certain, but I think God is very improbable and I live my life on the assumption that He is not there. And seventh, strong atheist. I know there is no God, with the same conviction as Jung knows there is one. I'd surprised to meet many people in category 7, but I include it for symmetry with category 1, which is well populated. It is in the nature of faith that one is capable, like Jung, of holding a belief without adequate reason to do so. Jung also believed that particular books on his shelf spontaneously exploded with a loud bang. Atheists do not have faith, and reason alone could not propel one to total conviction that anything definitely does not exist. Hence, category 7 is in practice rather impetier than its opposite number, category 1, which has many devoted inhabitants. One count myself in category 6, but leaning towards 7. I am agnostic only to the extent that I am agnostic about fairies at the bottom of the garden. The spectrum of probabilities works well for temporary agnostic in practice. It is superficially tempting to place PAP, permanent agnostic in principle, in the middle of the spectrum with a 50% probability of God existence. But this is not correct. PAP agnostics ever that we cannot say anything one way or the other on the question of whether or not God exists. The question for PAP agnostics agnostics is principle unanswerable, and they should strictly refuse to place themselves anywhere on the spectrum of probabilities. The fact that I cannot know whether your red is the same as my green does not make the probability 50%. The proposition on offer is too meaningless to be dignified with a probability. Nevertheless, it is a common error, which we shall meet again, to leap from premise that the question of God's existence is a principle unanswerable to the conclusion that his existence and his non-existence are equiprobable. Another way to express that horror is in the terms of the burden of proof, and in this form it is pleasingly demonstrated by Bertrand Russell's parable of the celestial teapot. Many Orthodox people speak as though it were the business of skeptics to disprove received dogmas rather than of dogmatics to prove them. This is, of course, a mistake. If I were to suggest that between the Earth and Mars there is a China teapot revolving about the Sun in an elliptical orbit, nobody would be able to disprove my assertion, provided I were careful to add that the teapot is too small to be revealed even by our most powerful telescope. But if I were go on to say that, since my assertion cannot be disproved, it is intolerable presumption on the part of human reason to doubt it, I should rightly be thought to be talking nonsense. If, however, the existence of such a teapot were affirmed in an ancient book, taught as sacred truth every Sunday, and the instilled into the minds of children at school, hesitation to believe in its existence would become a mark of eccentricity and entitle the doubter to the attention of psychiatrists in an enlightened age, or of the inquisitor in the earlier time. We would not waste time saying so, because nobody, so far as I know, worship teapots, but if pressed, we would not hesitate to declare our strong belief that there is positively no orbiting teapot. Yet strictly we should all be teapot agnostics. We cannot prove for sure, and there is no celestial teapot. In practice, we move away from teapot agnosticism towards teapotism. A friend who was brought up a Jew and still absorbed the Sabbath and other Jews' customs out of loyalty to his heritage describes himself as a tooth fairy agnostic. He regards God as no more probable than one tooth fairy. You can't disprove either hypothesis, and both are equally improbable. He is an atheist to exactly the same large extent that he is an fairyist, an agnostic about both the same small extent. Russell's teapot, of course, stands for an infinite number of things whose existence is conceivable and cannot be disproved. The great American lawyer Clarence Darrow said, "I do not believe in God as I do not believe in Mother Goose." The journalist Andrew Mueller is of the opinion that plugging yourself in any particular religion is no more or less weird than choosing to believe the world is rhombus-shaped, though the cosmos in the pincers of two enormous green lobsters called Esmeralda and Keith. A philosophical favorite is the invisible, intangible, inaudible unicorn, disproof of which is attempted yearly by the children at CampQuest, a popular deity on the internet at present, and as undisprovable as Yahweh or any other, is a flying spaghetti monster who many claim has touched them with his noodly appendage. I am delighted to see that the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster has now been published as a book to great acclaim. I haven't read it myself, but who needs to read a gospel when you just know it's true? By the way, it had to happen. A great schism has already occurred, resulting in the Reformed Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. The point of all these way out examples is that they are undisprovable, yet nobody thinks the hypothesis of their existence is on an even footing with the hypothesis of their non-existence. Russell's point is that the burden of proof rests with the believers, not the non-believers. Mine is related point that the odds in favor of teapot, spaghetti monster, Esmeralda and Kate, unicorn, etc. are not equal to the odds against. The fact that the orbiting teapot and tooth fairies are undisprovable is not felt by any reasonable person to be the kind of fact that settles any interesting argument. None of us feels an obligation to disprove any of the millions of far-fetched things that a fertile, facetious imagination might dream schema. I have found it an assuming strategy when I asked whether I am an atheist, to point out that the questioner is also an atheist when considering Zeus, Apollo, Amon-Ra, Mithras, Baal, Thor, Wotan, the golden calf, and the flying spaghetti monster. I just go on God further. All of us feel entitled to express extreme skepticism to the point of outright disbelief, except that in the case of unicorns, tooth fairies are the gods of Greece, Rome, Egypt, and the Vikings. There is nowadays no need to bother. In the case of Abrahamic God, however, there is a need to bother because a substantial proportion of the people with whom we share the planet to believe strongly in his existence. Russell's teapot to demonstrate that the ubiquity of belief in God as compared with belief in celestial teapots does not shift the burden of proof in logic, although it may seem to shift it as a matter of practical politics. That you cannot prove God's non-existence is accepted and trivial, if only in the sense that we cannot never absolutely prove the non-existence of anything. What matters is not whether God is disprovable, he is not, but whether his existence is probable. That is another matter. Some disprovable things are sensibly judged by far less probable than other undisprovable things. There is no reason to regard God as immune from consideration along the spectrum of probabilities, and there is certainly no reason to suppose that just because God can be neither proved or not disproved, his probability of existence is 50%. On the contrary, as we shall see. Noma. Just as Thomas Huxley bent over backwards to pay lip service to completely impartial agnosticism right in the middle of my 7-stage spectrum, theists do the same thing from the other direction. And for an equivalent reason, theists do the same from the other direction for an equivalent reason. The theologian Alistair M.C. Grath makes it the central point of his book, Dawkins, God, Genes, Memes, and the Origin of Life. Indeed, after his admirably fair summary of my scientific work, it seems to be the point only in rebuttal that he has to offer the undeniable but ignominiously weak point that you cannot disprove the existence of God. On page after page, I read M.C. Grath. I found myself scribbling teapot in the margin, again invoking T.H. Huxley. M.C. Grath says, fed up with both theists and atheists, making hopelessly dogmatic statements on the basis of inadequate empirical evidence. Huxley declared that the God question could not be settled on the basis of the scientific method. M.C. Grath goes on quote Stephen Jay Gould in similar vein. To say it for all my colleagues and for the umpteenth millionth time for college bull session to learn treatise, science simply cannot adjudicate the issue of God's possible superintendence of nature. We neither affirm nor deny it. We simply can't comment on it as scientists. Despite the confident, almost bullying tone of Gould assertion, what actually is the justification for it? Why shouldn't we comment on God as scientists? And why isn't Russell's teapot or the flying spaghetti monster equally immune from scientific skepticism? As I shall argue in a moment, a universe with creative superintendent would be a very different kind of universe from the one without. Why is that not a scientific matter? Gould carried the art of bending over backwards to positively supine lengths in one of his less admired books, Rocks of Ages. There he coined the acronym NOMA for the phrase non-overlapping magisteria. The net of magisterium of science covers the empirical realm. What is the universe made of? Fact. What is the universe made of? Fact. And why does it work this way? Theory. This magisterium of religion extends over questions of ultimate meaning and moral value. These two magisteria do not overlap, nor do they encompass all inquiry. Consider, for example, the magisterium of art and the meaning of beauty. To cite the old cliches, science gets the ages of rocks, and religion the rocks of ages. Science studies how the heavens go, religion how to go to heaven. This sounds terrific, right up until you give it a moment's thought. What are these ultimate questions in whose presence religion is an honored guest and science must respectfully slink away? Martin Rees, the distinguished Cambridge astronomer whom I already mentioned, begins his book Our Cosmic Habitat by posing two candidate ultimate questions and giving a NOMA-friendly answer. The preeminent mystery is why anything exists at all. What breathes life into the equation and actualized them in a real cosmos? Such questions lies beyond science. However, they are the province of of philosophers and theologians. I would prefer to say that if indeed they lie beyond science, they most certainly lie beyond province of theologians as well. I doubt that philosophers would thank Meriton Rees for lumping theologians in with them. I am tempted to go further and wonder if in what possible sense theologians can be said to have a province. I am still amused when I recall the remark of former warden or head of my Oxford College. A young theologian had applied for a junior research fellowship, and his doctoral thesis on Christian theology provoked the warden to say, "I have grave doubts as to whether it's a subject at all." What expertise can theologians bring to deep cosmological questions that scientists cannot? In another book, I recounted the words of an Oxford astronomer who I asked him one of those same deep questions, said, now we move beyond the realm of science. This is where I have to hand over to our good friend, the chaplain. I was not quick-witted enough to utter the response that I later wrote. But why the chaplain? Why not the grandeur or the chef? Why are scientists so cravenly respectful towards the ambition of theologians over questions that theologians are certainly no more qualified to answer than scientists themselves? It is a tedious glitch, and unlike many glitches, it isn't even true that science concerns itself with how questions, but only theology is equipped to answer why questions. What on earth is a why question? Not every English sentence begin with the word why is a legitimate question. Why are unicorns hollow? Some questions simply do not deserve an answer. What is the color of abstraction? What is the smell of hope? The fact that a question can be phrased in a grammatically correct English sentence doesn't make it meaningful or entitle it to our serious attention, nor even if the question is a real one. Does the fact that science cannot answer it imply that religion can? Perhaps there are some genuinely profound and meaningful questions that are forever beyond the reach of science. Maybe quantum theory is already knocking on the door of the unfathomable. But if science cannot answer some ultimate questions, what makes anybody think that religion can? I suspect that neither the Cambridge nor the Oxford astronomer really believe that theologians have any expertise that enables them to answer questions that are too deep for science. I suspect that both astronomers were, yet again, bending over backwards to be polite. Theologians have nothing worthwhile to say about anything else. Let's throw them a soap and let them worry away at a couple of questions that nobody can answer and maybe never will. And like my astronomer friends, I don't think we should even throw them a soap. I have yet to see any questioned reason to suppose that theology, as opposed to biblical history, literature, etc., is a subject at all. Similarly, we can agree that science entitlement to advise us on moral values is problematic, to say the least. But does gold really want to cede to religion the right to tell us what is good and what is bad? The fact that it has nothing else to contribute to human wisdom is no reason to hand religion a free license to tell us what to do. Which religion anyway? The one in which we happen to have been brought up. To which chapter then? Of which book of the Bible should we turn? But they are far from anonymous, and some of them are odious by any reasonable standards. How many literalists have read enough of the Bible to know that the death penalty is prescribed for adultery, for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and for cheating your parents? If we reject Deuteronomy and Leviticus, as all enlightened moderns do, but what criteria do we then decide which of religion's moral values to accept? Or should we pick and choose among all the world's religions until we find one whose moral teaching suits us? If so, again we must ask, by what criterion do we choose? And if we have independent criteria for choosing among religious moralities, why not cut out the middleman and go straight for the moral choice without the religion? I shall return to such questions in chapter 7. I simply do not believe that Gould could possibly have meant much of what he wrote in Rocks of Ages. As I say, we have all been guilty of bending over backwards to be nice to an unworthy but powerful opponent, and I can only think that this is what Gould was doing. It is convincible that he really did intend his unequivocally strong statement that science has nothing whatever to say about the question of God's existence. We neither affirm nor deny it. We simply cannot comment on it as scientists. This sounds like agnosticism of the permanent and irrevocable kind, full-blown path. It implies that science cannot even make probability judgments on the question. This remarkably widespread fallacy, many repeat it like a mantra, but few of them, I suspect, have thought it through, embodies what I refer to as the poverty of agnosticism. Gould, by the way, was not an impartial agnostic, but strongly inclined towards de facto atheism. On what basis did he make the judgment if there is nothing to be said about whether God exists? And God hypothesis suggests that the reality we inhabit also contains a supernatural agent who designs the universe, and at least in many versions of hypothesis, maintains it and even intervenes in it with miracles, which are temporary violations of his own otherwise grandly immutable laws. Richard Swinburne, one of the Britain's leading theologians, is surprisingly clear on the matter of his book Is There a God? Is There a God? What the theist claims about God is that he does have a power to create, conserve, or annihilate anything, big or small, and he can also make objects move or do anything else. He can make the planets move in the way that Kepler discovered that they move, or make gunpowder explode when we set a match to it, or he can make planets move in quite different ways and chemical substances explode or not explode under quite different conditions from those which now govern their behavior. God is not limited by the laws of nature. He makes them and he change or suspend them if he chooses. Just too easy, isn't it? Whatever else this is, it is very far from Noma. And whatever else they may say, those scientists who subscribe to the separate magisterial school of thought should concede that a universe with a supernatural intelligent creator is a very different kind of universe from one without. The difference between two hypothetical universes could hardly be more fundamental in principle, even if it is not easy to test in practice, and it undermines the complacently seductive dictum that science must be completely silent about religion's central existence claim. The presence or absence of creative superintelligent and unequivocally a scientific question, even if it is not in practice or not yet a decided one. So also is the truth or falsehood of every one of the miracle stories that religions rely upon to impress multitudes of the faithful. Did Jesus have a human father, or was his mother a virgin at the time of his birth? Whether or not there is enough surviving evidence to decide it, this is still a strictly scientific question with a definite answer in principle. Yes or no? Did Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead? Did he himself come alive again 3 days after being crucified? There is an answer to every such question, whether or not we can discover it in practice, and it is a strictly scientific answer. The methods we should use to settle the matter, in the unlikely event that relevant evidence ever become available, would be purely and entirely scientific methods. To dramatize the point, imagine by some remarkable set of circumstances that forensic archaeologists unearthed DNA evidence to show that Jesus really did lack a biological father. Can you imagine religious apologists shrugging their shoulders and saying anything remotely like the following? Who cares? Scientific evidence is completely irrelevant to theological questions. Wrong magisterium. We are concerned only with ultimate questions and with moral value. Neither DNA nor other scientific evidence could ever have any bearing on the matter, one way or the other. The very idea is a joke. You can bet your boots that the scientific evidence, if any, were to turn up, would be seized upon the trumped to the skies. Noma is popular only because there is no evidence to favor the God hypothesis. The moment there was the smallest suggestion of any evidence in favor of religious belief, religious apologists would lose no time in throwing Noma out of the window. Sophisticated theologians aside, and even if they are happy to tell miracle stories to the unsophisticated in order to swell congregations, I suspect that alleged miracles provide the strongest reason many believers have for their faith, and miracles by definition violate the principles of science. The Roman Catholic Church, on the one hand, seems sometimes to aspire to Noma, but the other hand lays down the performance of miracles as an essential qualification for elevation to sainthood. The late king of the Belgians is a candidate for sainthood because of his stand on abortion. Earnest investigations are now going to discover whether any miraculous cures can be attributed to prayers offered up to him since his death. I'm not joking. This is the case, and it is typical of saint stories. I imagine the whole business as an embarrassment, more sophisticated circle within the church. Why any circle worthy of the name of sophisticated remain within the churches is a mystery, at least as deep as those that theologians enjoy. Would they be praying for them rather than for somebody else? But care was given to tell them only the first name and initial letter for the surname, initial letter of the surname. Apparently, that would be enough to enable God to pinpoint the right hospital bed. The very idea of doing such experiments is open to a generous measure of ridicule, and the project duly received it. As far as I know, Bob Newhart didn't do a sketch about it, but I can distinctly hear his voice. What's that you say, Lord? You can't cure me because I am a member of the control group? Oh, I see. My aunt's prayers aren't enough, but Lord, Mr. Evans in the next door bed, what was that, Lord? My Evans received 1,000 prayers per day. But Lord, Mr. Evans doesn't know 1,000 people. Oh, they just referred to him as John E. But Lord, how did you know they didn't mean John Elsworthy? All right, you used your omniscience to work out which John E. they meant. But Lord, and so on. Valiantly shouldering aside all mockery, the team of researchers soldiered on, spending $2.4 million for Templeton money under the leadership of Dr. Herbert Benson, a cardiologist of Mind or Body Medical Institute near Boston. Dr. Benson was earlier quoted in a Templeton press release as believing that evidence for the efficacy of intercessory prayer in medicinal setting is mounting. Reassuringly then, the research was in good hands, unlikely to be spoiled by skeptical vibrations. Dr. Benson and his team monitored 1,802 patients at 6 hospitals, all of whom received coronary bypass surgery. The patients were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 received prayers and didn't know it. Group 2, the control group, received no prayers and didn't know it. Group 3 received prayers and did know it. The comparison between Group 1 and Group 2 test for the efficacy of intercessory prayers. Group 3 tests for possible psychomatic effect of knowing that one is being prayed for. Prayers were delivered by the congregations of 3 churches, one in Minnesota, one in Massachusetts, and one in Missouri, all distant from the 3 hospitals. The praying individuals, as explained, they are given only the first name and initial letter of the surname of each patient for whom they were to pray. It is good experimental practice to standardize as far as possible, and they were all accordingly told to include in their prayers the phrase for a successful surgery with a quick, healthy recovery and no complications. The result reported in the American Heart Journal of April 2006 were clear-cut. There was no difference between those patients who were prayed for and those who were not. What a surprise! There was a difference between those who knew they had been prayed for and those who didn't know one way or other. But it went in the wrong direction. Those who knew they had been the beneficiaries of prayer suffered significantly more complications than those who didn't. Was God doing a bit of smithing? Too probable that those patients who knew they were being prayed for suffered additional stress in consequence. Performance anxiety. As the experimenters put it, the Charles Betha, one of the researchers, said it may have made them uncertain, wondering, am I so sick they had to call in their prayer team? In today's litigious society, it is too much to hope that those patients suffering heart complications as a consequence of knowing they were receiving experimental prayers might put together a class action lawsuit against the Templeton Foundation. It will be no surprise that this study was opposed by theologians, perhaps anxious about its capacity to bring ridicule upon religion. The Oxford theologian Richard Swinburne, writing after the study failed, objected to it on the grounds that God answers prayers only if they are offered up for good reasons. Praying for somebody rather than somebody else simply because of the fall of the dice and the design of a double-blind experiment does not constitute a good reason. God would see through it, and that indeed was the point of Bob Newhart's satire, and Swinburne is right to make it too. But in other parts of his paper, Swinburne himself is beyond satire. Not for the first time he seek to justify suffering in the world run by God. My suffering provided me with the opportunity to show courage and patience. It provides you with the opportunity to show sympathy and to help alleviate my suffering. And it provides society with the opportunity to choose whether or not to invest a lot of money in trying to find a cure for this or that particular kind of suffering. Although a good God regrets our suffering, his greatest concern is surely that each of us shall show patience, sympathy, and generosity, and thereby from a holy character. Some people badly need to be ill for their own sake, and some people badly need to be ill and provide important choice for others. Only in the way can some people be encouraged to make serious choices about the sort of people they are to be. For other people, illness is not valuable. Illness is not so valuable. This grostic piece of reasoning, so damningly typical of the theological mind, reminds me of an occasion when I was on a television panel with Swinburne and also with our Oxford colleague Professor Peter Atkins. Swinburne at the point attempted to justify the Holocaust on the grounds that it gave the Jews a wonderful opportunity to be courageous and noble. Peter Atkins splendidly growled, "May you rot in hell." Another typical piece of theological reasoning occurs further along in Swinburne's article. He rightly suggests that if God wanted to demonstrate his own existence, he would find better ways to do it than slightly basing the recovery statistics of experimental versus control groups of hurt patients. If God existed and wanted to convince us of it, he could fill the world with super miracles. But then Swinburne lets fall his gem. There is quite a lot of evidence anyway of God's existence, and too much might not be good for us. Too much might not be good for us. Read it again. Too much evidence might not be good for us. Richard Swinburne is the recently retired holder of one of the Britain's most prestigious professorships of the theology and is a fellow of British Academy. If it's a theologian you want, they don't come much more distinguished. Perhaps you don't want a theologian. Swinburne wasn't the only theologian to disown the study after it had failed. The Reverend Raymond J. Lawrence was granted a generous tranche of op-ed space in the New York Times to explain why responsible religious leaders will breathe sign of relief and that no evidence could be found of intercessory prayers having any effect. Would he have sung a different tune if the Benson study had succeeded in demonstrating the power of prayers? Theologians would. The Reverend Lawrence's piece is chiefly memorable for the following revelation. Recently, a colleague told me about a devout, well-educated woman who accused a doctor of malpractice in his treatment of her husband. During her husband's dying days, she charged the doctor had failed to pray for him. Other theologians joined Noma-inspired skeptic in contending that studying prayers in this way is a waste of money because supernatural influences are by definition beyond the reach of science. But as the Stapleton Foundation correctly recognized when it financed the study, the alleged power for intercessory prayers is at least in the principle within the reach of science. A double-blind experiment can be done and was done. It could have yielded a positive result, and if it had, can you imagine that a single religious apologist would have dismissed it on the grounds of that scientific research has no bearing on religious matters? Of course not. Needless to say, the negative results of experiment will not shake faithful. Bob Barth, the spiritual director of the Missouri Prayers Ministry, which supplied some of the experimental prayers, said, "A person of faith would say that this study is interesting, but we have been praying a long time and we have seen prayer work. We know it works, and the research on the prayer and its spirituality is just getting started." Yeah, right. We know from our faith that prayer works, so if evidence fails to show it, we will just soldier on until finally we get the result we want. The Neville Chamberlain School of the Evolutionists. A possible ulterior motive for those scientists who insists on Noah, the invulnerability to science of the God hypothesis, is a peculiarly American political agenda provoked by the threat of populists creationism, and parts of political agenda provoked by threat of populist creationism in parts of the United States. Science is under attack from a well-organized, politically well-connected, and above all, well-financed opposition, and the teaching of evolution is in the frontline trench. Scientists could be forgiven for feeling threatened because most research money comes ultimately from government. An elected representative have to answer to the ignorant and prejudiced as well as to the well-informed among their constituents, most notably represented by the National Center for Science Education (NCSE), led by Eugene Cott, indefatigable activist on behalf of science, who has recently produced her own book, Evolution versus Creationism. One of NCSE's main political objectives is to quote and mobilize sensible religious opinion. Mainstream churchmen and women who have no problem with evolution and may regard it as irrelevant to their faith, or even in some strange way supportive of their faith. If it is to this mainstream of clergy, theologians, and non-fundamentalists believers, embarrassed as they are by creationism because it brings religion into disrepute, that the evolution defense lobby tries to appeal. And one way to do this is to bend over backwards in their direction by espousing Noma, agree that science is completely non-threatening because it is disconnected from religion's claim. Another prominent luminary of what we might call the Neville Chamberlain school of evolutionists is the philosopher Miracle Reeves. Reeves has been an effective fighter against creationism, both on paper and in court. He claims to be an atheist, but his article in Playboy takes the view that we who love science must realize that the energy of our enemies is our friend. Too often evolutionists spend time insulting would-be allies. This is especially true of secular evolutionists. Atheists spend more time running down sympathetic Christians than they do countering creationists. When John Paul II wrote a letter endorsing Darwinism, Richard Dawkins' response was simply that the Pope was a hypocrite, that he could not be genuine about science, and Dawkins himself simply preferred an honest fundamentalist. From a purely tactical viewpoint, I can see the superficial appeal of Reeves' comparison with the fight against Hitler. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt did not like Stalin and communism, but in fighting Hitler, they realized that they had to work with the Soviet Union. Evolutionists of all kinds must likewise work together to fight creationism. But I finally came down on the side of my colleague, the Chicago genetists Jerry Kaine, who wrote that Reeves fails to grasp the real nature of conflicts. It is not just about evolution versus creationism. To scientists like Dawkins and Wilson, the celebrated Harvard biologist, the real war is between rationalism and superstition. Science is but one form of rationalism, while religion is the most common form of superstition. Creationism is just a symptom of what they see as the greater enemy, religion. While religion can exist without creationism, creationism cannot exist without religion. Religion can exist without creationism, but creationism cannot exist without religion. I do have one thing in common with the creationists like me, but unlike the Chamberlain school, they will have no truck with Noma and its separate magistra. Far from respecting the separateness of science's turf, creationists like nothing better than to trample their dirty hobnails all over it, and they fight dirty too. Lawyers for creationists in court cases around the American bone dogs seek out evolutionists who are openly atheists. I know to my chagrin that my name has been used in this way, an effective tactic, because juries selected at random are likely to include individuals brought up to believe that atheists are demons incarnate on a par with pedophiles or terrorists, today's equivalent of Salim's Wished and MC Carthy's commies. Any creationist lawyer who got me on the stand could instantly win over the jury simply by asking me, has your knowledge of evolution influenced you in the direction of becoming an atheist? I would have to answer yes, and at one stroke, I would have lost the jury. By contrast, the judiciary correct answer from the secularist side would be, my religious beliefs or lack of them are a private matter, neither the business of this court nor the connected in any way with my science. I couldn't honestly say it for reasons I shall explain in chapter 4. The Guardian journalist Madeline Bouting wrote an article entitled Why the Intelligent Design Lobby Thanks God for Richard Dawkins. There is no indication that she consulted anybody except Michael Rose, and her article might as well have been ghosted written by him. Dan Dennett replied, aptly quoting Uncle Remus, I find it amusing that two Brits, Madeline Bouting and Michael Rose, have fallen for a version of one of the most famous scams in America, folklore. Why the Intelligent Design Lobby Thanks God for Richard Dawkins, March 27. When Bearer Rabbit gets caught by the fox, he pleads with him, oh please, Bearer Fox, whatever you do, don't throw me in that awful briar patch, where he ends up safe and sole after the fox does just that. When the American propagandist William Dembski writes tauntingly to Richard Dawkins, telling him to keep up the good works on behalf of intelligent design, Bouting and Roos fall for it. Oh golly, Bearer Fox, you fighting assertion that evolutionary biology disproves the idea of a creator God, jeopardize the teaching of biology in science class. Science teachings that would violate the separation of church and the state. Right, you also out to soft paddle physiology, since it declares virgin birth impossible. The whole issue, including an independent invocation of Briar Rabbit in the Briar Patch, is well discussed by the biologist P. Z. Myers, whose Frangula blog can reliably be consulted for trenchant good sense. I'm not suggesting that my colleagues of the appeasement lobby are necessarily dishonest. They may sincerely believe in Noma, although I can't help wondering how thoroughly they have thought it through and how they reconcile the internal conflict in their minds. There is no need to pursue the matter for the moment, but anyone seeking to understand the published statement of scientists on religious matters would do well not to forget the political context. The surreal cultural wars now rendering America Noma-style appeasement will surface again in a later chapter. Here I return to agnosticism and the possibility of chipping away at our ignorance and miserably reducing our uncertainty about the existence or non-existence of God. Little Green Man. Suppose Bertrand Russell's parable had concerned not a teapot in outer space but life in outer space, the subject of Sagan's memorable refusal to think with his gut. Once again, we cannot disprove it, and the only strictly rational stance is agnosticism. But the hypothesis is no longer frivolous. We don't immediately scent extreme improbability. We can have an interesting argument based on incomplete evidence, and we can write down the kind of evidence that would decrease our uncertainty. We would be outraged if our government invested in expensive telescope for the sole purpose of searching for orbiting teapot. But we can appreciate the case of spending money on SETI, the search of external intelligence using radio telescope to scan the skies in the hope of picking up signal from intelligent aliens. I praised Carl Sagan for disavowing gut feelings about alien life, but one can, and Sagan did, make a sober assessment of what we need to know in order to estimate the probability. This might start from nothing more than a listing of our points of ignorance, and in the famous Drake equation, which in Paul Davis's phrase collects probabilities, it states that to estimate the number of independently evolved civilization in the universe, you must multiply 7 terms together. The 7 includes the number of stars, the number of Earth-like planets per stars, and the probability of this, that, and the other, which I need not to list because the only point I'm making is that they are all unknown or estimated with enormous margin of error. When so many terms that are either completely or almost completely unknown that are multiplied up, the product, the estimated number of alien civilizations, has such colossal error bars that agnosticism seems a very reasonable, if not the only credible stance. Some of the terms in the Drake equation are already less unknown than when he first wrote it down in 1961. At the time, our solar system of planets orbiting a central star was the only one known, together with local knowledges provided by Jupiter's and Saturn's satellite system. Our best estimate of the number of orbiting systems in the universe was based on theoretical models, coupled with the more informal principle of mediocrity. The feeling, born our uncomfortable history, the lesson from Copernicus, Hubble, and others, the feeling that there should be nothing particularly unusual about the place where we happen to live. Unfortunately, the principle of mediocrity is in its turn emasculated by the anthropic principle, see in chapter 4. If our solar system really were the only one in the universe, this is precisely where we as beings who think about such matters would have to be living. The very fact of our existence could retrospectively determine that we live in an extremely unmediocre place. But today's estimates of the ubiquity of solar systems are no longer based on the principle of mediocrity. They are informed by the direct evidence, the spectroscope nemesis of the comet's positivism strikes again. Our telescopes are scarcely powerful enough to see planets around other stars directly, but the position of the stars is perturbed by the gravitational pull of its planets as they will whirl around it. And a spectroscope can pick up the Doppler shifts in the star's spectrum, at least in case where the perturbing planet is large. Mostly using this method, at the time of writing we know of 170 extrasolar planets orbiting 147 stars, but the figure will certainly have increased by the time you read this book. So far, they are bulky Jupiters because only Jupiters are large enough to perturb their stars into the zone of detectability of present-day spectroscopes. We have at least quantitatively improved our estimate of one previously shouldered term of the Drake equation. This permits a significant, still moderate, easing of our agnosticism about the final value yielded by the equation. We must still be agnostic about life on the other world, but a little bit less agnostic because we are just that bit less ignorant. Science can chip away at agnosticism in a way that Huxley bent over backwards to deny for it. With the special case of God, I am arguing that notwithstanding the polite abstinence of Huxley, Gould, and many others, the God question is not in the principle of forever outside the remit of science. As with the nature of the stars, contra comte, and as with the likelihood of life in orbit around them, science can make at least probabilistic inroads into the territory of agnosticism. My definition of God hypothesis included the words superhuman and supernatural. To clarify the difference, imagine that a SETI radio telescope actually did pick up a signal from outer space which showed unequivocally that we are not alone. It is a non-trivial question. By the way, what kind of signal would convince us of its intelligent origin? A good approach is to turn the equation around. What should we intelligently do in order to advertise our presence to extraterrestrial listeners? Rhythmic pulses wouldn't do it. Jocelyn Bell Burnell, the radio astronomer who first discovered the pulsar in 1967, was moved by the precision of its 1.33 second predictee to name it tongue-in-cheek the LGM, Little Green Man signal. She later found a second pulsar elsewhere in the sky and of different periodicity, which pretty much disposed of the LGM hypothesis. Metronomic rhythmic can be generated by many non-intelligent phenomena, from swaying branches to dripping water, from the time lags in self-regulating feedback loop to spinning and orbiting celestial bodies. More than 1,000 pulsars have now been found in our galaxy, and it is generally accepted that each one is spinning neutron star emitting radio energy that sweeps around like a lighthouse beam. It is amazing to think of a star rotating on a time scale of second. Imagine if each of our days lasted 1.33 seconds instead of 24 hours, but just about everything we know of neutron stars is amazing. The point is that the pulsar phenomena is now understood as a product of simple physics. Now intelligence, not intelligence. Nothing simply rhythmic then would announce our intelligence presence to the waiting universe. Prime number of often mentioned as the recipe of choice, since it is difficult to think of a purely physical process that could generate them, whatever by detecting prime numbers or by some other means. Imagine that SETI does come up with unequivocal evidence of extraterrestrial terrestrial intelligence, followed perhaps by a massive transmission of knowledge and wisdom along the science fiction lines of Fred Holly's Andromeda or Carl Sagan's Contact, how should we respond? A pardonable reaction would be something akin to worship. For any civilization capable of broadcasting a signal over such an immense distance is likely to be greatly superior to ours, even if that civilization is not more advanced than ours at the time of transmission. The enormous distance between us entitles us to calculate that they must be millennia ahead of us by the time of message reaches us, unless they have driven themselves extinct, which are not unlikely. Whatever we get to know about them or not, they are very probable alien civilization that are superhuman to the point of being godlike in ways to exceed everything a theologian could possibly imagine. Their technical achievements would seem a supernatural to us, as our would seem a dark age peasant transported to the 21st century. Imagine his response to a laptop computer, a mobile telephone, a hydrogen bomb, or a jumbo jet. Arthur C. Clarke put it in his third law: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The miracles wrought by our terminology would have seemed to the ancients no less remarkable than the tales of Moses parting the waters or Jesus walking upon them. The aliens of our SETI signal would be to us like gods, just as missionaries were treated as God and exploited the undeserved honor to the hilt when they turned up in Stone Age cultures bearing guns, telescope matches, and almanacks predicting eclipses to the second. In what senses then would the most advanced SETI aliens not be God? In what senses would they be superhuman, but not the supernatural? In a very important sense, which goes to the heart of this book, the crucial difference between gods and godlike extraterrestrials lies not in their properties but in their provenance. Entities that are complex enough to be intelligent are product of an evolutionary process. No matter how godlike they may seem, what we encounter them, they didn't start that way. Science fiction authors such as Daniel F. Galloy in Counterfeit World have even suggested, and I think how I disprove it, that we live in a computer simulation set up by some vastly superior civilization. But the simulators themselves would have to come from somewhere. The laws of probability forbid all notions of their spontaneously appearing without simpler anecdotes. They probably owe their existence to a perhaps unfamiliar version of Darwinian evolution, some sort of cumulatively ratcheting crane, as opposed to skyhood, to use Daniel Dennett's terminology, skyhood, including all gods. Our magic spell, they do not bona fide explanatory work, all demand more explanation than they provide. Cranes are explanatory devices that actually do explain. Natural selection is the champion crane of all time. It has lifted life from primeval simplicity to the dizzy heights of complexity, beauty, and apparent design that dazzle us today. This will be dominant theme of chapter 4, why there almost certainly is no God. But first, before proceeding with my main reason for actively disbelieving in God's existence, I have a responsibility to dispose of the positive argument for belief that have been offered through history. Tom Fallon, editor of Free Inquiry, makes the point forcefully. Secularism's breakthrough moment, Free Inquiry, 26/3, 2006, 1617. If theists are lonely and downtrodden, we have only ourselves to blame. Numerically, we are strong. Let's start punching our weight. In March 2007, Representative Pete Stark, U.S. Congressman for the California, publicly acknowledged his lack of theistic beliefs. He has since been defeated, leaving Congress in 2012 as the only avowed atheist. Sire, I had no need of that hypothesis. As Laplace said when Napoleon wondered how famous mathematician had managed to write his book without mentioning God, perhaps I spoke too soon. The Independent on Sunday of 5 June 2005 carried the following items. Malaysian officials says religious sect which built scared teapot the size of a house has flouted planning regulation. Camp Quest takes the American institution of the summer camps in an entirely admirable direction, unlike the summer camps that follows a religious or scouting ethos. Camp Quest, funded by Edwin and Helen Kagan, is run by secular humanists, and children are encouraged to think specially for themselves while having a very good time with the usual outdoor activities. Next chapter, chapter 3, is Arguments for God's Existence. We'll listen it in the next chapter.